This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You are tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. I don't know where you sit, but for where I sit, the view from the six is looking mighty nice as the Toronto Raptors have just completed winning Game 7 and has now locked down an important semifinals conference showdown between the Toronto Raptors and the Miami Heat. We've already got the Western Conference semifinals underway. The Eastern Conference semifinals will be happening. It's just on and popping as we start getting down to that home stretch of finding out who are going to be the two teams to represent in the 2015-2016 NBA Finals. An exciting time and a lot of storylines and intricate plots that we definitely want to get into. And you know I got to do it with my right-hand man, 50 grand NBA aficionado, Don Mack, contributor, right up on the illest websites, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna and PNC, my brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The Heat did their thing. And so did the Toronto Raptors, man. What's the vibe like down there in the South Florida, A?
Well, first of all, salute to all the fans, listeners of the NBA Baseline. We're so happy to be back with you talking NBA playoff basketball. I'm down here in South Florida, man. These Miami Heat dudes, they giddy. They're real happy. They're feeling real confident about going into Game 7. They're feeling extra confident now going against a wobbly Raptors team, as we'll get into that a little bit later on. So a lot of great playoff basketball to discuss. A lot of teams that are, are no longer with us, so we have to, send them on their way with some parting gifts. But a lot of great shows, a lot of great things to discuss on this week's show, man. So let's jump right in, brother.
Most definitely, man. And once again, man, we appreciate all of our fans and listeners of the Baseline, those who tuned into us through Rabble TV, and a lot of us who also catch us doing our thing through the Twitter. You know how to get at my man Shaw, at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at GameFace Lee. But we always encourage you to get the show's Twitter handle at NBA_the Baseline. Hashtag up the Baseline. Let us know who you are and what you're about. Available on all the major platforms. Available on iTunes, Player FM, Microsoft TuneIn, and Stitcher Radio. So be sure to download any one of those platforms. Allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things NBA basketball. This week, man, great show on tap. Of course, we're going to be talking about the conference semifinals, East and West. We'll also do our thing, as Shaw alluded to in a little bit, as we start getting some teams on their Go On Git tour, as we start embarking on the losers of the first round. And then, of course, big major hire, Los Angeles Lakers looks like they found their man. And of course, you got to pull it from the best of the pecking order. So clearly out in Golden State, one assistant head coach now finds himself donning the crown to be the head man in Los Angeles. And we'll get into that topic a little bit later on. So we appreciate you and yours, of course, listening and tuning in. And we always encourage you to get at us as we continue to forge ahead through this year's NBA playoffs. You know how we do, and you know how we like to set it off. It's time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it
down to the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And big topic, of course, it's the conference semifinals. Basically now, there are 8 teams that are remaining. And out of those 8, we obviously know who the top dogs are representing from each prospective conference. But it doesn't go without drama when you think about what's happened to the Golden State Warriors. When you think about, what the Atlanta Hawks have basically had to do in order to put themselves in a position to play in the semifinals. But teams like the San Antonio Spurs and teams like the Cleveland Cavaliers did what they needed to do. They took care of the weaker team, so to speak. And they look like they are the most formidable and the most strong teams. But it's not to be without said that whoever it is that's going to be opposing them, in this case, the Cavaliers taking on the Atlanta Hawks, the San Antonio Spurs taking on the Oklahoma City Thunder, what our expectations are is that the second round will be a lot better than the first. And Shaw, the first thing that I think we want to start looking at when we talk about this conference semifinals is, what is the mood? What is the tone really that needs to be set now that we have all 8 teams in place? Cavaliers, Hawks, Raptors, Heat, and in the Western Conference, Spurs, the Thunder, and of course the Golden State Warriors and the Portland Trailblazers?
Clean slate. I think that's what you want to start with, with some of these teams, especially teams that took 7 games to get past, their first round opponents. It's a new series. It's a new day. You have new life. You're basically starting back at 0-0. And I think all these teams want to get in here now and, look at these individual matchups. And sometimes, not sometimes, all the times, it really is about a matchup thing in the playoffs. So I think some of these teams, especially when you look at the Raptors and the Heat, and some of the other teams that just scrape by, if you will, to get in here, they're going to be like, all right, well, what do we need to do now? How does that now change our approach to the rest of these playoffs, and how do we match up with this team that we're now faced against here in the semifinals?
Shaw, let's go right into the Raptors and the Heat, because clearly that's the freshest one, so to speak. And the question that I have that I would love for you to kind of give some insight on is this. In both of these series, are we talking more about the Miami Heat, the Toronto Raptors, respectively, the higher seeds? Or are we talking more in the context of teams like the Hornets and teams like the Indiana Pacers, how much they vastly improved to contest these upper seeds? Because, it's interesting. When the Heat played their first 2 games in the series, there was a whole lot of talk about how the Miami Heat basically looked like the team people feared, or people hoped that they wouldn't look like if you were a Cleveland Cavaliers fan, or if you were the Cleveland Cavaliers, because they looked like the team that would be primed to contest a team like the Cleveland Cavaliers. And then we come down to a game 7 where it basically took that 7th game before they rounded into form, suddenly woke up and realized that they are actually in the NBA playoffs. I'm just wondering if whether or not the series more exposed the fallacies of both of these ball clubs, despite what their seedings represent.
Well, I think with Miami and Charlotte, I'm going to start there. I mean, remember, those teams finished with this exact same record and really just were a matter of seeding based on head-to-head record in the regular season. Then it came down to a tiebreaker. Miami ended up winning the 3 seed and getting a home court advantage and all that. But Miami and Charlotte were very evenly matched. Again, both finishing 48 and 33 in the regular season. I think in the case of Toronto and Indiana, it's one of those things we look at, well, the Pacers had the best player in the series, and that's usually always good for at least 1 or 2 wins for the team that has that best player, even if they don't have necessarily the best team. Yes, I think Toronto potentially has been exposed, and I don't think Kyle Lowry is 100% healthy, which is a huge and major factor for them. DeRozan seems to have slipped back in some of his old ways, being inefficient, but I do feel like we're still going to get a very good series from this out of Toronto and Miami, as they can both try to expose each other's weaknesses. But the thing about Miami, more so than anything else, that they're a different team than Toronto has played for the most part of the regular season. I think in their current form, Toronto only played this Miami team maybe once, with Joe Johnson and all that. And I think Wade missed that game. So since Miami's been playing at a faster pace, Toronto hasn't seen this team. So it's going to be real interesting to see how they adjust to this team going into the series.
You're tuned to the Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Our breakdown conversation is we're talking conference semifinals in the NBA. So, Shaw, with that being said, what's the expectations for? I mean, and it's kind of interesting because I don't know who you could really favor in this. I presume that people are going to favor the Toronto Raptors because they have the home field advantage, but I tend to favor the Miami Heat because they seem to have more playoff-heady basketball players who know what it's going to take in order to get the job done. And if it's going to come down to the guard play, I got to tell you, if the Goran Dragic that showed up in Game 7, actually in Game 6, second half of Game 6 and in Game 7 is going to be on this basketball court, I definitely give the advantage to the Miami Heat getting the better of the Toronto Raptors in this series.
I think you're 100% correct, and I'd be very surprised to see if people were picking Toronto over Miami in this situation because of the things you just said. Miami has a future Hall of Famer in Dwayne Wade. They have Goran Dragic playing at a high level. They have probably now the best interior presence left in the NBA playoffs with Hassan Whiteside, and they have the overall experience when you factor in a guy like Luol Deng who's been playoff tested and things like that. Obviously, Wade in the championships too. So I think Miami is definitely favored despite not having home court advantage in this series. And Toronto is going to be very hard pressed again. As I mentioned earlier, I don't think Lowry is 100% healthy. And that's going to be a huge problem for them moving forward. So we'll see how this plays out. But my edge is definitely going to Miami right now.
Is it incumbent upon the Miami Heat to entertain the thought about Chris Bosh actually, making a surgence here, or even the speculation about him desiring to play? Should the Miami Heat look to kind of kill that in its tracks before this series begins?
Well, I don't know that they need to kill it. I think they internally know what's happening. They've said that there's no update. And to me, at this point, they're just moving on like he's not going to play. And that's really how they need to operate. The speculation that seems to continue to come out there comes from the media and comes from other people outside the organization. But I don't think it's something that Miami's very, very concerned about right now. And they're not looking for Bosch to come back. I don't think Toronto needs to be game planning for Bosch secretly or anything like that. It's just going to be who these two teams are, who we saw them in the first round. That's who we're going to see in the second round. I don't think you can get anybody coming out of the woodworks like Chris Bosch.
If there's a matchup that I am looking forward to, it's Hassan Whiteside and Jonas Valanciunas. I'm talking like WWE, you know what I'm saying? Like
it's gonna get real
extreme rules, you know what I'm saying? And I'm really interested to see my man Drake mouthing off to Dwayne Wade behind the back of his head when they come up there to the north during this semifinal series. I find it very interesting because, I don't know how much, I'm sure Drake respects, Paul George. I'm sure he has a lot of respect for Paul George now because Paul George almost single-handedly helped this Indiana Pacers team, give the Six a little something that they surely didn't want to deal with again, like for the third year in a row in the first round of a playoff series. But the one thing that I do know about this Miami Heat is they embrace the hype, man. They love the idea of, kind of garnering up, the hype that kind of circulates around this. And there's gonna be a lot of paparazzi on this, man. There's gonna be a little pizzazz on this because of the fact that we're dealing with some high profile people that are really dedicated to their fan base. So I think it has the makings for a good basketball game. Now, what I'm curious, Shaw, is do you think the quality of this basketball game is going to be good?
I do think so. And, even going back to your previous point there, it's already being dubbed DJ Khaled versus Drake, in terms of the entertainment and the moguls series, if you will. But I think we are going to see some good basketball, some great adjustments. We're going to see some actually good defense, which may not look for aesthetically pleasing basketball. But, especially with the way DeRozan and Lowry are struggling shooting the basketball right now, Miami's going to definitely try to focus on that. And you're 100% correct. Valanciunas versus Whiteside is going to be a war down low in the trenches. I think Valanciunas is going to be pretty good against Whiteside because he's going to do some traditional post-up moves. He's not going to try to jump over him or go through Whiteside in that way. He's going to, really use some of the moves and try to do some hooks and try to get around him. So Whiteside isn't a great post defender. He's great off the weak side block and trying to on-help defense. And I think that's where Toronto may have an advantage if they choose to use it with Valanciunas, because they forgot about him a little bit here in this series. Had some good couple games to start, got in foul trouble, and they went away from him. I think he really is going to be the key to what Toronto does. Him and, hey, if they get an inspired performances like from Norman Powell and even Terrence Ross, if he decides that he remembers how to play basketball and forgets that he's dating Amber Rose for the playoffs, I think the Toronto Raptors will have a very good chance. But overall, I'm still picking Miami.
All right, let's go ahead and switch gears, Shaw, and talk about the other semifinals matchup, and that's between the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Atlanta Hawks. Look, credit to the Atlanta Hawks. They did what they needed to do, really in the air of a lot of skepticism. I think a lot of people were probably gunning for the Boston Celtics to win that series, but you and I, we've talked about this, that this was the worst possible matchup for the Boston Celtics to take on a team like the Atlanta Hawks. And listen, the Atlanta Hawks looked very spotty at times, but when they were on, they were as good as you could probably say as most of the teams that were representing in the first round of the NBA playoffs. I just wonder if whether or not that momentum can carry itself against the Cleveland Cavaliers team, which this Hawks team has never really been successful with against. Even when LeBron James played with the Miami Heat, he's always seemed to have the Atlanta Hawks number. And this is it's pretty much the same kind of matchup that we're talking about from last year in the conference finals. But the feeling and the aura is a little bit different, obviously, because it's a semifinals matchup.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think Atlanta really has the guns or the horses, if you will, to take out Cleveland in this series. It'll be semi-competitive, but I can go ahead and say it. I think Cleveland's going to win this in 5. The way that they played, it might be one of those, they have the long layoff and they, Atlanta maybe catches them a little bit earlier on, but I think Cleveland just, they seem focused. Kevin Love is giving them some great production. J.R. Smith has been consistent throughout the playoffs as well. Obviously, Kyrie Irving and LeBron James do what they do on a regular basis, but I think the key for them them has been Kevin Love. On the Atlanta side, they're going to need Kent Bazemore to continue to make that money, if you will. He seems like he's definitely gunning for a contract and playing great basketball so far, but that was against a Boston Celtics team that just didn't really match up well with them overall, almost position by position. We'll see what happens now when Bazemore has to go up against LeBron James, things like that, and how Coach Bud decides to guard LeBron. He put Millsap on him like he did last year, where that ended up being atrocious, for Atlanta. They have to find a way. They don't even have DeMar Carroll anymore. What are they going to do when LeBron is bringing out the ball and trying to get into the lane? I think it's going to be a very, very tough series for Atlanta moving forward.
Yeah, it's going to be tough because, even to this point, Shaw, we continually keep saying to ourselves, what is this Atlanta Hawks team? Is this an Atlanta Hawks team that prides itself more on the defensive side, or is it now that this is a team that wants to open up and kind of run and gun, so to speak, and accelerate that pace? And we saw them do that against the Boston Celtics. To the credit, of Coach Budenholzer, he had, adapted and changed the style I think that this team is used to. But now you got a team that really does offer a level of versatility that can either play the half court game or can even pick up the tempo, probably pick up the tempo a heck of a lot faster than the Atlanta Hawks. So it kind of goes back to that same added that we always keep talking about. Is it just by the circumstance when we tell people stay true to who you are, or is Coach Budenholzer really going to have to lean on somebody in this team being the alpha dog in order to give themselves a chance to even stay in the series?
Well, where they do have an advantage, I do think Al Horford can be very, very aggressive in the series if he wants to get some shots down on the block, and even so, if he wants to be involved in pick and roll, pick and pop. I think that's something that they're going to have to focus on, making Al Horford a key part of what they do offensively. Millsap is still going to get his, and Millsap is underrated still to this day and a very good basketball player. And I think he'll be able to still get some shots up, get some points too, but I think he's going to have a hard time trying to defend on the other side of the basketball, where that might take him out of the offensive rhythm a little bit. So for me, Horford needs to be kind of the focus. Teague still has to be able to put pressure on Kyrie Irving for them to get shots. And then again, as I said, Kent Bazemore has to continue to play at a high level. Think about this now, again, with Atlanta. They're coming out of a series where Boston missed a lot of open shots and missed a lot of open threes. Cleveland is shooting the three ball better than anybody in the NBA playoffs right now. That even includes Golden State. And they're not going to miss those same shots that Atlanta was able to get, give Boston, if you will. You can't give those same shots to Cleveland. Otherwise, it will be death, and the Cleveland Cavaliers run away in this series.
All right, you're tuned to the Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Just finished our conversation regarding the Eastern Conference semifinal matchups between the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Atlanta Hawks, and the Miami Heat and Toronto Raptors. Let's go ahead and switch gears, Shaw, and talk about the Western Conference semifinals matchup. Over this past weekend, we've seen game ones between the San Antonio Spurs and the Oklahoma City Thunder, and we've also seen the matchup between the Golden State Warriors and the Portland Trailblazers. Now, I don't know if whether or not we really want to spend too much time about what happened between the Oklahoma City Thunder and the San Antonio Spurs. I mean, clearly this was just a game where, team just got outworked. Got taken out, behind the Alamo and got the worst whooping they've ever seen. I'm just more concerned about the demeanor and the mentality that this basketball team tends to have, Shaw. And to me, it's been somewhat something that's lingering, even what I saw in the series against the Dallas Mavericks. I give it. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be a sense of urgency. They had a bad basketball game maybe in some sorts, but I'm just seeing some bad habits between Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant. And I don't know if it's something that we should be paying attention to, but it is the worst possible time to kind of show that aspect of themselves against a team as veteran branded and championship minded as the San Antonio Spurs.
It's definitely a little concerning, but I think a lot of people are saying, well, OKC tends to disappear at times. So that's a throwaway game. You really need to see how they respond now in game 2, and then obviously in game 3 when they get back on their home floor. So I'm going to reserve comment on it. I think, again, it was just, they came out, San Antonio shot like 80% or something like that in the first quarter. Yes, OKC didn't really defend, but there were some of these things that were just falling for San Antonio, and they just caught a bad one. They caught an L, and they have to put it past them and really now focus on getting back into the series. Listen, we already know Coach Popovich is going to outcoach Billy Donovan. That's a given. but can the star power of Durant and Westbrook, and then again getting a third scorer, a third person, and then somebody else to dig in even defensively, can that help them? Can they find that to get them past and get them some wins in this series to make it competitive? Again, I'll go out here and say it. I don't think the Spurs are losing this series. I think it goes maybe 6 games, 4-2, but I definitely don't feel like OKC is going to get romped in every single game like they did in game 1.
But in I guess in my mindset, Shaw, what I'm looking at more so is what these two guys represent, because what they're supposed to represent is the last of a dying breed in some sorts. If these guys don't get it done, then the speculation is that they may not stay together in Oklahoma City. They may not stay together, and we'll see another division, so to speak, of the power, the superpowers. And we often talked about how, it's important maybe to get 2 or 3 superstars together in order to give yourself an opportunity to win championships. We're still trying to see if that's going to come to fruition out in Cleveland with Kyrie Irving, Kevin Love, and LeBron James. And when you have the equalizer in my mindset, whether it's the San Antonio Spurs or the Golden State Warriors, this is the only other team that I could think of right now, Shaw, that's going to be a close reflection of what that era kind of represented, so to speak. And I just wonder, do these guys understand it? These guys are top 5 NBA guys. Respectively, wherever you want to put them, they're in the top 5. They make up, a third of that number. And to be together and have this one opportunity. And I'm not taking anything away from the San Antonio Spurs, but clearly they're playing they're up against a machine that they simply just do not know how to beat. And it's just kind of strange. I mean, 4 years ago, we weren't talking about that. We were talking about these guys on the precipice of doing something absolutely great, and there may not be anyone in the Western Conference capable of bringing down these two dudes.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a mindset, and they do have some demons that they need to exercise, as a franchise, and KD coming back and being healthy this year, Westbrook, same thing, and playing in a contract year. And despite what the rumors may say, there is some speculation. Yes, they won their first round series, but if they get beat and get beat pretty easy by San Antonio, then yeah, the rumors are going to start back up again. But I do feel, after that first round series, and we didn't get a chance to talk about it, after Cuban said Westbrook wasn't a superstar, even KD coming to Westbrook's defense like that, they kind of gave me that solidarity, like, damn, you know what? He really does, like this dude, and I think he may try to see it out with him at least for another year, so they can both maybe ride out to the sunset, whether that be another team together or, leave going in the separate ways. We'll have to see. But the San Antonio Spurs are a huge problem for them, and they have to find a way to get and to continue to make others better around them, because Popovich and Leonard and those guys, they're going to take some of the things that they like to do away from them. So now how do they make their teammates better? Because yes, it's on them, but they have to find other people to score, other people to defend if they really want to try to get some wins in this series.
It's just amazing, Shaw, because we talk about how the Achilles heel for the San Antonio Spurs are teams that show more athleticism to them. And in that first game, I just didn't see anything that gave me any room for concern that this San Antonio Spurs team wouldn't be able to keep up with the with the Oklahoma City Thunder. And I guess maybe it's because until I see, Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook take it up another level, am I going to, really have to I have to change that mentality or that mindset, because then it would lead me to believe that the only other team that I think is capable of hanging with the San Antonio Spurs who could play at this level would be the Golden State Warriors. And speaking of Golden State Warriors, Shaw, they started their series against the Portland Trailblazers. Unfortunate circumstance, obviously, for the Los Angeles Clippers, losing 2/3 of their powerhouse team combination of Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, and DeAndre Jordan. We'll talk a little bit about the Clippers in the show. But, when you look at this series with the Golden State Warriors, this, again, is a byproduct of a team that just obviously understands and gets it. They don't have their MVP player. They don't know if they're going to have their MVP player for this series. And maybe it's great luck that this happens, because this puts a wake-up call to all the key pieces that the Warriors are ultimately going to need if they're going to continue this impressive run since they eclipsed the 72 win mark in the regular season. But when you watch how this team is playing, man, it's just something of beauty. It's poetry, it's Picasso, it's all of the artistry you can come up with and just embodied into one fluid unit. And it's just awe-inspiring. And the Portland Trailblazers witnessed that firsthand in their first game against them.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes to show you, you feel like, okay, Golden State is a one-man band, but you understand that they have 3 All-Stars on their roster. They have, an amazing coach with amazing assistants. One who we'll talk about even in particular a little bit later on, and just a bunch of guys who bonded together, and that's what it takes to win a championship, as they did a year ago, and they never lost sight of that focus. And even with Step Out, they're very formidable and better than most of the teams that are still currently in the Eastern Conference and Western Conference on both sides. Again, they'll need Steph back before they can actually, if they really want to get past San Antonio and eventually win a championship. But I think Portland is going to be a nice little test for them. I think it will be competitive, in terms of, maybe going 5 games. But I think even with Curry now potentially trying to come back in game 2, even if he doesn't, Golden State has enough to beat this Portland team. Even before game 1, I still felt that way, and there's nothing that's going to change my mind about Golden State being as formidable as anybody still in the Western Conference.
One of the things about the Golden State Warriors, Shaw, and we've talked about this in previous shows. I've mentioned this, and the thing that's concerned me about this team is that their defense wasn't what it was like last year. While they still have some decent defensive numbers, I think that they've taken a step back. Not just on the defensive metrics aspect of things, but just their ability to stop, the better team's best player. And now what we've seen in the first 5 games of their NBA playoff run is that they're getting back to that. They made it a hell for James Harden to find quality shots, made Dwight Howard look like a shell of himself. And in this game against Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, they're proving once again that these 2 guys can have the greatest chip on their shoulders. It's still not going to stop the Golden State Warriors express. And Klay Thompson is playing on another level. He's playing at a level that, it's interesting. If these 2 guys, Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, were not playing on the same team together, what would Klay Thompson truly look like as an individual player? He's basically taking that center stage when, the way that he shoots the basketball, the way that he's defending. I'm starting to see why we were talking about this backcourt combination being the best from last year, not even getting an NBA championship. It's now starting to round a form, but it starts defensively. And it's interesting because that's exactly what Draymond Green harps on every single time. From that Houston Rockets series, they have to get better defensively, and they started to show that, on the back end after that loss to the Houston Rockets in the first round, and on their way into this the first game of the series.
Well, it's nice when you lose an All-Star that you can rely on 2 more to kind of take his place, and that's exactly what they've done. And again, Draymond and even Klay to maybe a lesser degree, they really do rely on their defense, and they're able to use their size. And on the whole, Kerr's done a great job in the last 2 years overall, using both of their sizes and using the size of his team in general. So no matter who guards or who, you try to run, the famous pick and roll, they run the switches and they hedge out, and it's always like they're throwing the same size and almost always the same ability to move with guards or people running the pick and roll with the ball handlers. That's uncanny, and that's something like you're right. They forgot that a little bit during this season, and they went on this unprecedented run and shooting whatever it was 1,000+ threes or whatever it was that they made this season. But you're right, defense is what wins in the playoffs, and they're definitely getting back to that. Like I said earlier, switching on everything and not being concerned about who ends up on what on the mismatches, because they're so know that they can rely on their other guys to come back and help them if somebody does beat them getting around the corner, or if they hedge out too far and they're able to get back to their men. So I really like what they're doing on that side of the basketball. They're going to make it hell for Lillard as they did in game 1, and I think you're going to see that throughout the series. And then again, once they get past this team, it should be good times when they get to Portland. Hopefully Steph Curry when they get to San Antonio, and hopefully Steph Curry will be back.
And kudos to Steve Kerr once again pushing the right buttons, putting the right personnel in the game when necessary. I mean, we didn't even see Festus Ezeli so far yet in this semifinal series. He's playing Anderson Varejao, and even Anderson Varejao is contributing for this Golden State Warriors team. He clearly sees the writing on the wall and would love to see his opportunity to playing in an NBA championship. final setting. So, this is a team that clearly is, without Steph Curry, they still believe that they are the best team in the NBA, and they're certainly displaying it. And this is what you get now in the semifinals, the best of the best duking it out to give themselves an opportunity to play in each other's respective conference finals. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, and this was The Breakdown. Time now for the drop. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And it's that time, man. First round of the NBA playoffs is done. That basically means 8 teams need to get on and get. So let's not even waste any time about it, Shaw. Let's run right through those teams. Let's first start off in the Western Conference. We saw the Dallas Mavericks try their hardest to hang with the Oklahoma City Thunder, but it was all for naught. What is your assessment of the Mavericks season?
Good season, great coach, but they do have some questions, as all these teams are going to have. Dirk has already said, listen, he's not going to be part of any type of rebuilding situation, so they're going to need to go ahead and get some guys behind them. Chandler Parsons, was injured. They had a lot of injuries. Darren Williams has already said he's going to opt out of his contract. They're going to have to bring in some more bodies, more healthy bodies, and younger guys who can handle the rigors of the NBA season and still keep them competitive going forward into the playoffs. So very concerned how that's going to look. Chandler Parsons said he wants to stay, wants to help recruit. Is already talking to Dwight Howard. We'll talk about the Rockets maybe next or in a few minutes. But bright future in Dallas, so to speak. Only because they still have a great coach, and Dirk does want to be there for the long haul, but still a lot to be decided in free agency for them.
All right, and now let's go ahead and talk about probably the most disappointing team that was not just in the first round. I mean, they had a disappointing season, but the way that they just got blasted in the first round, the Houston Rockets. And it's funny, Shaw, you're talking about how Dwight Howard has expressed some interest in the Dallas Mavericks. It'll be very interesting, how Mark Cuban looks at what we saw from Dwight Howard's demeanor that was depicting of whether or not that's going to yield success for his basketball franchise. But I don't know too many teams that looked at what Dwight Howard and James Harden experience with any kind of, eye of envy, given the way that they just basically just sold out JB Bickerstaff and really the Houston Rockets fan base. They did not deserve what they saw in that first round.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if this isn't a team that blows things up to some degree. Howard is pretty much all but gone, as again, already rumored to maybe Dallas with Chandler Parsons, rumored to Orlando, to Milwaukee as well. The Knicks expressed some interest. Boston expressed some interest in the regular season. Don't know how much they still have. So with Howard out of the fold now, who comes to this team? Who fills that big man spot? Capella is a nice young guy, but I can't imagine that he's someone who they want to build around at the center position. They're probably going to lose Terrence Jones as well in unrestricted free agency. So lots to be decided there. As for this team, James Harden is their unequivocal leader, but they need to get better. Daryl Morey is not locked to come back next year. I think ownership is going to take a hard look at that situation. They also missed out on some of the higher, better coaching candidates already by being in the playoffs and kind of, wasting everyone's time. They missed out on some people. I think they were linked to Scott Brooks, and then he ended up going over to Washington. So does Bickerstaff get to stay, or do they try to bring in somebody else? Van Gundy, that's Jeff Van Gundy now being linked to that job potentially as well. Does he make a return to Houston? But you're right. Disappointing season. It was just horrendous and atrocious to watch. They don't like each other. That's why they just need to blow this things up and see what they can get with James Harden potentially still as their main focal point of the team.
All right, let's go ahead and talk about two teams particular. First one, I mean, listen, I'm not an absolute fan. I'm a fan of Doc Rivers, of course, and I'm a fan of what he's trying to help the Clippers franchise do. But there's some players there, they're who they are, but you still have to feel bad for this team. If you're a Clippers fan or you're not a Clippers fan, for them to go down the way that they went down, and take nothing away from the Portland Trailblazers, this is what happens when you see a wounded animal. You know what I'm saying? You go in for the kill, and that's exactly what they did and advanced themselves in the semifinals. But to see the way Chris Paul went down, the way Blake Griffin went down, when this team was a potential team that could probably contend with and maybe even surpass the Golden State Warriors in that second round, for the way that they were able to lose the top players in that first round, Shaw, just absolutely heartbreaking.
It was, you want to see the best basketball you potentially can, and you know how much the Clippers and Golden State Warriors don't like each other. So we definitely got robbed of that series potentially. I'm assuming the Clippers would have held on to win, and dispatch Portland had they not gotten injured. But now you wonder what happens. Does Doc step down as the president of basketball operations? Do they look to trade Blake Griffin? You'd be selling for pennies on the dollar if you did. But something's got to happen with this Clippers team again. I don't think in any other year when we talk about teams that have left the playoffs have we been talking about so many teams potentially blowing things up and moving in another direction. And I think that seems to be the case with maybe 6 or 7 of the teams that we're going to discuss, on this segment of the show. And usually it's like, okay, well, you're happy they made it. They'll get better. They just need to add a piece here, there. But we're talking about a lot of teams now that might be in the flux and changing things, and the Clippers are right at the front of that because this combination, for whatever it is, injury, heart, whatever you want to call it, just hasn't worked out. Doc Rivers has a lot of explaining and a lot of soul searching to do with this team over the summer.
Yeah, but do you think that they're hesitant that with what's happened here, that it's at least bought them in one more year? I mean, listen, Blake Griffin goes down, before the halfway mark of the season. And the Clippers look like a decent basketball team, was just being eclipsed by the fact that the Golden State Warriors were just doing something obviously historical. And then you see how this team was able to gel without Blake Griffin. Yes, Blake Griffin had that idiotic incident that he had, with one of the training staff members, and then wound up being suspended even, to further his timeline of him making it on this team. But there were still some good things. Now, the one thing I will say is when they made that move to get Jeff Green, Jeff Green, again, did Jeff Green. I mean, I love the guy, but my God, man, it's just these lapses where he doesn't show up for basketball games. I just wonder if because of the circumstance in the way that this team kind of fell apart, and it not at any fault of their own, they just fell apart because of the injuries. Is that buying them time before we start really putting, Doc Rivers on the clock?
Well, I think to some degree it's an intriguing question and a very good one, simply because Doc is an emotional guy and he's sentimental and he's attached to his players. And from a business standpoint, too, as I said earlier, if you tried to trade Blake, you would be taking pennies on the dollar, unless a team like Boston is willing to give you a king's ransom for him. So yeah, there's a very good possibility this team does come back. But I think Doc has to really look at it, sit with Ballmer and the rest of his ownership and the rest of the on the team and front office and figure out, okay, are we really a good basketball team that can contend for a championship, or are we just continually going to be snake bitten? And sometimes it is a matter of just maybe trading a guy out and changing the luck per se and changing the course of your franchise. But I think because, like what you mentioned there, Doc is a sentimental guy. They might have bought themselves another year. I just don't think that is necessarily the wise decision to do. But again, we'll see what happens over the summer.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie, Warren, Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, our segment of The Drop, talking about the teams that just have to go on Git as they got knocked out of the first round of the NBA playoffs. Let's keep it moving, Shaw. The Memphis Grizzlies, man, talk about grit, grind, heart. San Antonio Spurs has basically ripped the heart right out of them. But listen, man, the fight in this team, pretty telling, especially when your own coach is basically shedding tears, because he is just absolutely, what I'm saying, he has nothing but love for that team that went out there and they tried their hardest, they tried their damnedest, to try to make a series against a juggernaut of a team like the San Antonio Spurs. And I have to say the same thing, man. That's like, look, if I didn't have so many teams that I have an affinity for to watch and play, the Memphis Grizzlies is definitely one of those teams that are up there, bro.
Yeah, the Grizzlies are a great organization in terms of, what they embody, as a team, and maybe even up into the upper management. Definitely their coach with Jaeger. That was heartbreaking to watch how much he loved this team and how much they fought. And you look at all the stats that are thrown out and how many guys they had hurt in the season. And it's amazing that they were able to still make the playoffs. But again, another team at this point, what are you doing? Do you continue to do the grit and grind and whatever the case may be and say, okay, this is who we are? Is it getting to be a 4 seed, maybe a 5 seed, and getting to the first round? Maybe you slip by and get to the second round. Is that good enough? How many years are you going to do the exact same thing? So they have some questions there with Mike Conley being a free agent. He said that, listen, he wants to see some new bodies get into there. And if not, he may be very willing to walk. They're going to do everything they can to keep him. But I'm not sure that this Memphis Grizzlies team is going to be back in the same form. And I don't think that's a bad idea if they decide to change and move in the other direction.
I just think that they have to be firm about who they believe is the cornerstone of this franchise. And listen, no disrespect to Mike Conley, but I think if you're Mike Conley, man, you should embrace the idea of exploring other possibilities and really seeing what's out there. You could be a key piece, to give yourself an opportunity to win that championship. Look, Mike Conley is up there in them years, bro. He's not going to have too many shots getting the bite to the Big Apple. He's seen it maybe once or twice already. I don't know if he's going to be able to do it again with this Memphis Grizzlies organization. And if you're the Memphis Grizzlies organization, you really have to entertain the idea of how you're going to supplement what you're doing. And it may be at the expense of saying, you know what, it may not be through having a guard like Conley and having a Marc Gasol. I'm not saying that Marc Gasol shouldn't be, questioned because they did give him that big deal. But what I'm saying is that to look at this team for what it is in comparison to the landscape of what's out there in the NBA, you probably are going to have to change your mentality or change your philosophical approach about how you want to maintain your success in this conference. Let's go ahead and talk about teams now in the Eastern Conference, man. And, the Detroit Pistons, man, you talk about a team that is defiant to the end and truly embraces. They don't have the gut of Stan Van Gundy, but they got guts like Stan Van Gundy, and they laid it out there against the Cleveland Cavaliers in that first round. I give the Pistons props, man. They did not back down from the Cavaliers team, and most people thought that this was going to be a blow-by sweep, but that was far from it. Even Stanley Johnson is talking out of his skull. I mean, it wasn't as if he didn't put it out there on the basketball court. I think people need to take notice that this is a Detroit Pistons team that is going to be ready to make some runs in the coming years.
Again, one of the few teams that we're not talking about, okay, they need to blow it up and rebuild. I think they have a good core. It was their first year in, especially under this new system and new regime with Van Gundy. Reggie Jackson's just got to learn how to play a little bit more under control. Stanley Johnson, as you just said, he's going to develop and become
he's
a
going to be
very
a
good
monster, man.
It's going to be a great player.
I hope he becomes a monster. I hate saying it because we all are saying it and we're all hyping it up because we've seen what this guy is capable of. But you know how sometimes when some head coaches, man, they think, oh, I got to bring him up a little bit. I got to bring him up slowly. And then we see them stymie, that growth of what this guy could potentially become and potentially do. Like if they felt like they had to not keep Tobias Harris at the expense of seeing what you could get from a Stanley Johnson, I am all for it, bro. All for it.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be the case. I mean, Harris is going to be there for a while, and I think they'll have to figure out what they're going to do with Marcus Morris. He's under contract and under a very affordable deal, but do you need to play him 35 minutes a night and maybe lessen his role a little bit? Harris starts and maybe you develop Stanley Johnson some. Same thing, KCP is still there, developing, and they're going to figure out what they're going to do with Andre Drummond in terms of his free throw shooting, because they can't have a guy like that with that size and his presence coming off the floor because he's shooting 30% from the free throw line. That has to be something that they work on this summer, and he needs to get to a respectable level, even 50, 60%, so that he can stay on the floor a little bit more on a regular basis. Another thing they need to do is get a backup point guard. I know they had Jennings and then ended up trading him, but I think they really need to address that. Steve Blake, as good as he is, his time has passed, and they need to find a suitable backup who can, put those minutes in behind Reggie Jackson.
All right, let's go ahead and focus our attention, Shaw, to the Boston Celtics. And, we talked about how the matchup between the Atlanta Hawks was not a great matchup for this basketball team. And this is a team, that showed glimpses of really how solid they can possibly be. They're clearly a few pieces short. And there's going to have to be some decisions being made with this basketball team. I don't know if you can continue to get away with the magic and the wizardry of Brad Stevens and the ability to juggle the roster that he has. At some particular point, you've got to give him something to work with. He's already got something good going on with Isaiah Thomas. The maturation of Marcus Smart is getting there. Evan Turner, a really solid guy. Would love to see him come back and don the black and green or the golden green and whatever formations of green we love. But, man, this front court's got to get shored up. And, this is more on Danny Ainge and him finagling and figuring out what to do with the plethora of draft picks that he has. But this is a Boston Celtics team that's in solid ground right now, but something still is going to have to be done if we're starting with the expectations that this team is going to be in some conference finals.
Yeah, I mean, they had a very interesting regular season, and then the playoffs, their weaknesses were definitely exposed against a team that, could expose them to the utmost, and they just weren't able to shoot. So they're in great position in terms of having picks. They're in great position in terms of having cap space, and having a recruiter like Isaiah Thomas and a coach that's very well liked in order to being seen as one of the top guys in Brad Stevens. That said, I am not 100% optimistic about what Boston's going to be able to do this summer. As always, it takes two to tango. They have a lot of picks who they're not going to be able to keep. I think they're going to end up overpaying for somebody, trying to unload some of those picks. And maybe they get a guy to come in there like an Al Horford or whatever. But it'll be very interesting to see what they do with what I guess will be the third pick. We'll find out after the lottery takes place later on in May. Because they need shooting badly, and I don't that makes them go after a guy like Buddy Hield, and I don't know that Buddy Hield is a number 3 pick in the NBA draft as much as I like him. So that to me is what I think it's a little concerning for the Boston Celtics. But otherwise, like you said, great season, but a lot of deficiencies that I don't know are going to be cured simply just by having the means to cure them, if you will.
And Shaw, listen, I don't want to start making this more about one particular player, but we talk about this, again, because sometimes loyalty tends to be the detriment of this this Boston Celtics team. But what do we make about Jared Sullinger? Listen, I don't know about you, bro, but I saw especially at the back end of this season and also going into the playoffs, Jared Sullinger, again, does not look like he is fully healthy, and he really didn't give the Celtics much of anything to work with to feel confident about trying to retain him if there's an expectation that he is going to be an important piece for this team moving forward.
Yeah, Sullinger, he really definitely fizzled out, and he was pretty much unplayable in the playoffs here versus the Atlanta Hawks because it was just a bad matchup. He wasn't mobile enough to stay with Horford or Millsap and didn't really have the size, and this is where he could bully them on the block either. So it really became a matchup thing here for him in this series. And I don't know that he'll be back. They didn't tender him an offer. They didn't. He's still restricted, so they can still give him a qualifying offer and then see what he gets out there in the open market. But I think Boston's going to be very smart and very, very selective with who they bring in next season, and I don't know that Sullinger will return. Amir Johnson also has a team option that the Celtics could decline if they needed to create more cap space, if they did get lucky in free agency or even via trade to bring in some bigger guys and better players in general. So a lot's going to happen with the Celtics roster, a lot of turnover. And again, I agree with you. I don't know if that Sullinger is going to be here. Going to be there in Boston next year.
I hope that the turnover, though, isn't too much where we start looking at how we look at teams like, the Washington Wizards, teams like the Houston Rockets, where, the way that we go about, adding the personnel, or even some of the Celtics teams that we had, when Doc Rivers, after they won the championship, where they were just picking up players for the sake of picking them up because we assumed that these guys still had one good run left in them to make. I just don't want to see that. I see a young core quality group of guys that should stabilize, and then whoever we're adding are necessary pieces to supplement some of the deficiencies that this team has shown through the course of the season, more notably the fact that we can't shoot the perimeter for a lick. So if we start getting some quality shooters in here, that will be a great start. But I'm hoping that we shore up that front court a little bit better so that this way guys can kind of be more comfortable in their roles and continue to develop the way that they ought to. 2 more teams left to go, Shaw, and clearly it's the last 2 teams that were standing in the Eastern Conference first round. We're talking about the the Indiana Pacers and the Charlotte Hornets, Shaw. Listen, what more can we say about the Charlotte Hornets? This was a basketball team that found themselves in a situation where, they ran up against a juggernaut in Game 7.
Yeah, Miami was just a buzzsaw in Game 7, and kind of like they were in the first game or two of the series, where they couldn't stop making shots. Luol Deng was murderous the entire series, and then Goran Dragic decided that he was going to put pressure back on Kemba Walker. Whiteside dominating them on the interior. So great game plan by Miami to get past Charlotte. But from the Charlotte side of things, you have to wonder again, what's going to happen? Al Jefferson's a free agent. Nicholas Batum was a free agent. 2 major pieces to what they did this year that got them over the hump, if you will, changed their style a little bit, brought in Jeremy Lin as well to create some space, get a couple more threes up, and just get more offense and get a better pace going. But now what happens with those two guys? They bring them back. Toombs seems like he wants to come back, but I'm not so sure that they'll be able to bring Al Jefferson back as well. Again, it was a good year. Maturation of Kemba Walker still saw him not really rise to the moment here in the Game 7, but I think the future's still bright for him and what he's going to be able to do. But again, there's a lot of questions with Charlotte and their roster and what Michael Jordan is going to want to see going forward. I don't think Kaminsky was the right pick a year ago, and I'm very concerned about how he's going to develop over the next 2 seasons here in Charlotte. So, again, we'll see. But overall, a good and unexpected season, getting 48 wins.
All right, Sean. Finally, the Indiana Pacers, man. All for naught, I guess. But you know what? As impressive a run as you could possibly have. And if you're Paul George, man, you tip your cap to dude. The Raptors did what they were supposed to do. But man, what an impressive, comeback year for Paul George and the Indiana Pacers.
Yeah, it absolutely was. PG-13 did his thing, and I think he's right back as one of the top guys in the NBA, not even just in the Eastern Conference, and showing what he did in the playoffs here should be really interesting. Just saw a tweet as we're talking about the Pacers here right now that Vogel's contract is up, and there has been no talks about a discussion. So don't know what that means for the Indiana Pacers. Don't know that Vogel will not be back. But if they decide to move on from him for whatever reason, that would be a huge shift in what the Pacers are doing for next year. Again, they brought in Monte Ellis and was hoping that he could be, a guy who could really back up Paul George, if you will, and be his running mate. He didn't live up to those expectations and said that he had some fluid in his knee, and so maybe next year he comes back and regains some form. But Miles Turner is a guy who I think we're very excited about, as NBA fans, and they have some pieces, some things they can do, but they're still 1 or 2 guys away from being truly competitive in the Eastern Conference, even with Paul George returning to dominance.
Well, we said that the Indiana Pacers was a basketball team that, we thought maybe a couple of years from reasserting themselves as being contenders, and, a lot of it was going to be predicated on whether or not Paul George was going to kind of, redefine himself given the gruesomeness of the injury that he suffered to his leg. But he's obviously fit himself in quite nicely. I think Monte Ellis coming into form, he still needs a little bit of time, but the evolution or the coming of age, so to speak, of Miles Turner, I think couldn't have come at a better time. And this is a Pacers team where if you're Larry Bird, you have something to work off of. And for them to be able to do what they're doing with teams like the Pistons on the uptick, the Milwaukee Bucks, they took a step back, but they're still a very good young team. I just think that they just need to be a better direction taken. Obviously, the misstep, in Hammond signing Greg Monroe. But nonetheless, this is still going to be a basketball team that's going to be, and then now we're talking about a Chicago Bulls team that might be the one who's going to be on the back end of that totem pole, so to speak, when we said that there may be 1 or 2 good runs of this team left to go. So it'll be very interesting to see. But given the way that this Pacers team put themselves in the position that they're in, man, you got to tip their cap on them. But, as we say, man, tip the cap all you want to. But when it comes to our show, it's time for y'all to just
Go on Git.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Kyle Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Drop.
Coast to coast.
Time now for us to go coast to coast, discussing the news in the association. Nothing major long, but obviously the biggest news that is taking place coast to coast in the NBA, Mr. Shaw, is the hiring of Luke Walton to be the Lakers' newest head coach. Byron Scott on his way out the door. I am sure that you are feeling pretty good that the purple and gold has gotten the man who sits next to Steve Kerr, fresh off of a championship, to help this Lakers organization ascend itself from dismalness.
Pretty interesting. I think, what I want to discuss here is really, had some conversation on Twitter with our man Jabari and a lot of Laker fans, and the hiring of Walton seems to be being met with mixed reviews. From the fan base itself, they're saying he's still inexperienced, et cetera, et cetera. But, I'm looking at it from a standpoint, this is a team and a coach that can grow together. Walton still has some things he needs to work out as a coach in that organization. All the young guys have some things they need to work out. But there is a caveat to this. And there is some speculation that, they're going to try to go ahead and win immediately. Maybe they trade one or two of their assets. Maybe they trade this draft pick that they have coming up and try to get, one of those big names that might be available. Again, as we discussed earlier in the show, maybe if Blake Griffin becomes available, they'll obviously try to talk to KD, see if he's willing to come there. The DeMarcus Cousins rumors may be starting up again soon as well, too. Don't know which direction the Lakers are really going to go, because they don't seem like a team that's built for the rebuild, if you will, and waiting out and having a patient process. So they might try to get Walton some assets immediately, and that might be something that could be very, very interesting to see. What they do, how they do it, and if Walton is up to the task.
But why be so quick to pull the trigger? It almost feels as if they knew from Jump Street that they wanted Luke Walton, which I don't know how that can even be conceived, except for the fact that he was part of that impressive run at the beginning of the season where they ran off 24 straight basketball games. And clearly Luke Walton was a part of it, but there was always that speculation that Luke Walton wasn't directly the reason of it, because of the fact that you have such a great basketball team inherited upon you through Steve Kerr. So what about this? Is it making it seem as if the Los Angeles Lakers knew that they had their guy in Luke Walton, and this was a no-doubter?
Well, I mean, they just wanted to bring somebody that was familiar to them. They understand Luke, and he obviously played the organization for numerous years. And again, he was one of the hottest candidates out there currently. You could have argued that David Blatt was somebody that they probably should have pursued and looked at. But they felt like Walton, being a young guy, somebody who can even relate to the young guys that are currently on their team as well. I think they're looking for somebody that can just fit the entire mold, look kind of LA, understands what LA is about, understands what that organization is about, as well as the city in that of itself. And again, can relate to the players that they have on their roster. So we'll see if it ends up being a fit. That's who they wanted. I'm not saying that was their number one pick. I'm sure if they could have had a shot at Thibodeau, if they would have fired Scott even just a week earlier, that might have been an option for them. But that wasn't the case. We live in the now, and Luke Walton is the guy. So let's see how it plans out. But more importantly, let's see what they do to put around him going into next season. And then we'll have a clear indication of how quickly they're trying to rebuild this team.
Look, if I'm Luke Walton and this is what you wanted, then you can't pass up the opportunity. Do I believe that Luke Walton is the man for this job? I don't know, man. Let's put it like this: I don't have more confidence in the Lakers organization, and more so than I am worried about Luke Walton not being a good enough head coach, because he is under Mitch Kupchak and Jim Buss, not Jeannie Buss, Jim Buss. So I don't know. I don't know how much that is going to hold weight when you talk about the Los Angeles Lakers and their push to get marquee players to come play for Luke Walton immediately. Like, I just worry more so that this organization still is not on solid footing. And you have a guy who's part of an organization that's just been as solid over the last 3 to 4 years, and he's been a part of that. He's directly a reason why that is the case. I just wonder how much longer, I just wonder how battle tested he's going to be when things don't pan out the way that, they think that things will be, because how it gets sometimes out in Lakerland. They think of grandeur, but listen, man, they out there, in Castle Black. So it'll be very interesting, what's going to happen, when Luke Walton is going to see the first signs of adversity through the Lakers organization, and it's going to start as soon as the season ends for him with Golden State.
Yeah, you're 100% correct. But as I said earlier, a lot of it is going to be determined on what they decide in terms of their expectations are. So do they draft their pick or whatever it is, and then just kind of sit tight and say, hey, let's develop these young guys and see, do we have somebody in D'Angelo Russell? Do we have somebody in Julius Randle? Do we have somebody in Brandon Ingram, i.e. or Ben Simmons? Or do they trade some combination of all these players and then try to bring in somebody else? And then that will give us a clear indication of what Luke Walton's timeline is, what the Lakers' timeline is. What they do this summer will be everything we need to know about, okay, where should we place this team, and how much Walton is going to have, how much pressure he's going to have on him going into his first season.
Yeah, man, it's going to be really interesting. He's going to be playing against his old team. I'm sure Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, man, they're going to be a little salty about it. But listen, like they say in the movies, man, it's like, listen, man, don't take that butt whipping personally now. So it's going to be a while before we see the Lakers actually, leapfrog past, the likes of the Los Angeles Clippers and the Golden State Warriors. But, hey, we've seen it happen before. We've seen great coaches will their, teams that have no business winning to looking a lot better when the season progresses. Awesome show this week, Shaw, man. Again, man, it's great to be back in the helm and discussing things regarding the NBA, of course, through the podcast. And, man, it's wonderful when you get to this time of the year because that's when things start tightening up. The game gets more intense and the stakes gets raised much, much higher.
It absolutely does. And like you said, I'm right happy to be back with you as well and discussing the playoffs. We ran through some of these teams, a little bit out of our normal fashion and frames, but hopefully everybody was able to keep up with us and enjoy what we were able to do on this edition of the Baseline. Have another great show lined up in the coming weeks. Playoffs continue to roll on. Hopefully we get some better games, some better series here in the second round, but I'm excited, man. So once again, thanks to everybody for listening and tuning in. Make sure you stick with us and let's keep the conversation going on Twitter. If we didn't feel we covered some of these topics a little bit in depth enough, then let's go ahead and discuss it. Let's chop it up on the Twitter feeds, my dudes.
Most definitely, man. So for the Baseline, Kali, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys, and we'll catch up with you next time.